Today I want to take just a couple of minutes and review the 6 basic principles of IDEA. Now, these are critical points that must be clearly understood by any administrator, whether that administrator be in a public school or a private school. Now, the very first one is a free, appropriate public education. Every student in the United States is required to be able to receive a free and appropriate public education. There's been a lot of discussion over the years about what appropriate education means. This has gone through the courts over and over again because some people say that every need must be accommodated. The courts have ruled that that's not always the case. They also rely on the states to provide leadership. But IDEA says first and foremost that every child in the United States will receive a free, appropriate public education. Now, the second one is appropriate evaluation. Now, over the years, I've seen parents say, my child's been diagnosed with a disability. And when you ask the question, okay, what disability? And then they'll go into a lengthy explanation of what someone told them. The requirement under the law is that there be an appropriate evaluation. Now, that is often left to the responsibility of the local public schools. In some cases, the states mandate what that appropriate evaluation means. Now, in some cases, it means that a student must go through a battery of tests. I've also seen it in some cases where outside agencies, outside physicians, therapists will provide supplemental data and form that data that's collected so that you can make the proper evaluation, the appropriate evaluation. Again, it must be an appropriate evaluation. Simply just talking to a parent from the standpoint of a counselor or a principal or assistant principal isn't really enough. There must be a documentation. Sometimes parents don't want to hear that. Now, in the case of private schools, parents get very upset because they'll say, well, what does that mean to us? Well, the law is different for public schools than it is for private schools. Private schools, quite honestly, we are not mandated because we are not part of the public school system. Now, the interesting point is that charter schools are. And there's some court cases that have started popping up about the services provided within the context of a charter school and whether they qualify. And can the charter schools be held accountable under IDEA? Now, the next thing is the individual education plan. Now, there are very specific guidelines, and we'll talk about those a little bit later on in the course. But the reality is, in a public school, there must be an IEP. In a private school, they are not required. We are not required to have IEPs. If students receive services, they are required to have a service plan. That's where the difference is. And again, we'll get a little bit more detail about that in the next few weeks. But again, this is a major point of IDEA. It must be the least restrictive environment. Now, again, this is open to interpretation. The old model was that anybody with a disability was put in to specialized classes set aside because people couldn't control them. In some cases, it was like the way we treated those with mental illness. We put them in an institution and locked them up for a lifetime and just kept them away from everybody else. Now, the least restrictive environment, that means that a child must be able to participate if possible. And schools are always wrestling with the least restrictive environment. Again, that's where the collection of data comes into play. That's where that collaboration comes into play. Parent participation. Parents must be involved in the process. A school cannot simply unilaterally say, this child has a disability, so we're going to do this. They can't. Parents must be involved unless those parents formally and legally give up that right. And even that's been challenged in the courts. There must be procedural safeguards. Now, this is again, a topic that has gone through a lot of litigation over the years. But the bottom line is that we are trying to safeguard the child and provide the best education. We're trying to make sure that students don't fall through the cracks. And we just don't simply say, Jimmy or Sally, they're just troubled, or there's problems at home, that's why they're doing this or that, that's why they act that way. So we put in procedural safeguards to ensure that those children who have disabilities are getting the free, appropriate public education, and that they are being evaluated appropriately, that parents are involved. The law says that we must, the public school systems must provide safeguards so that if a parent disagrees with an IEP in a public school, they have an opportunity to dialogue and communicate with the school about why they think that's inappropriate. Again, it's a critical point that you have collaboration. You have to involve teachers. You have to involve administrators. You want to involve parents. That's what we talk about. When we talk about shared leadership, that's really at the base of it. So when we talk about the six major principles of IDEA, we're talking about free, appropriate public education. We're talking about appropriate evaluations. We're talking about individualized education plans. We're talking about least restrictive environments, parental participation, and most importantly, procedural safeguards. These are facts that every administrator, whether they're in public schools or private schools, must know. Again, I hope these comments have helped. As always, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please don't hesitate to let me know. I appreciate it and have a great day. Thanks.